You're listening to the Wrigleyville Nation podcast. Season ticket holders and lifelong fans with neighborhood ties discuss Cubs news and neighborhood happenings. Here's your hosts, Jeremy and Pat.
Hello and welcome to the Wrigleyville Nation podcast. This is episode 356 of the podcast. My name is Jeremy Deemer and I'll be your host. I'm joined as always by my co-host. He's my cousin and he's high atop Wrigleyville tonight. How's it going, Pat?
Well, it's big night in Wrigleyville tonight, Jeremy.
The Cubs taking 3 of 4 at home against the Cardinals. We'll talk about the week that was. We'll preview the week that will be. Talk about news. We'll go through kind of looking at August as the calendar turns. We're here. What's coming up for the Cubs? And to help us talk all things Cubs, you know him from his work at NBC Chicago, longtime friend of the podcast, James Neveau. Thanks for taking time out to talk Cubs with us tonight.
How you doing? Happy hosers out there in Radio Land. I'm wearing a Team Canada hat right now. Credit to Summer McIntosh. Go get some poutine and let's celebrate, boys and girls. Big week for Canada at the Olympics.
Absolutely, it is. It's a holiday tomorrow for our friends in Canada, and if you're watching on our YouTube channel, you can see James's fantastic hat, of course, over at YouTube.com. Search for Wrigleyville Nation Podcast. Make sure you're subscribed over there to the YouTube channel. Video version of the podcast there. Even if you don't want to consume it that way, you just get the audio. Throwing us a subscribe and a like helps us work the algorithm so we can find other Cub fans. So please support the show over there. And let's get into the week that was, Pat. The last time we podcasted, we were very upset as it was a frustrating scene as the trade deadline was upon us. We were unhappy with how Jed Hoyer was handling this trade deadline, and the Cubs were losing to Cincinnati. They lost that game, ended up losing 2 out of 3 in Cincinnati before coming home after the trade deadline and taking 3 of 4 from the Cardinals. Let's start with your thoughts since we've last podcasted. Are you still as frustrated about the trade deadline as we were last week?
Well, yeah. I mean, I think we'll see how this all plays out, but certainly there were some expiring contracts on this team that could have been probably moved at the deadline, you would think. Jed likes to hold out for deals. You know, when he doesn't get them, he'll hold on to a Wilson Contreras or whomever, you know, and let him walk at the end of the year. He's done that before. So, you know, the Hector Neris's and Drew Smiley's of the world and others, you know, for all we know, didn't garner the return he thought was appropriate or what. But, you know, we got through the deadline. The Cubs had a 7-game week. It was a big week because they were playing their divisional rivals, the Cardinals, as well as the Reds. And I think we had maybe predicted 3 and 4, you know, for the week seemed about right. Turns out they were 4 and 3. So, you know, slight improvement there. We find ourselves now with 48 games to go. And the Cubs are 6 games out of the last wild card, in 5th place, half a game ahead of the Reds, I think, for that fifth place for the final wild card spot, I should say, right? So on the one hand, you know, there's a lot of, I see on Twitter and social media, a lot of optimism about the Cubs right now because they're so red hot. They're like, 500 now since the All-Star break, so things are looking great. But on the other hand, you know, we still are sort of in this nebulous territory where there are a lot of teams ahead of the Cubs. Cubs have the tiebreaker advantage versus none of them, and we're kind of, you know, the season is moving away from us here. The Cubs are only 4 games under 500. So on the one hand, you know, if they can get hot, they have a chance at maybe getting up to that wild card spot. On the other hand, it's hard to get really excited about a team 4 games under 500 with only 48 games to go. It doesn't feel quite like it did. I remember when the Cubs were the wild card with 95 wins a couple of years ago, and they're the wild card with, was it 90 in 2015? Was it 97 wins or something? I mean, those are good teams where we're like, you know, this is a really good team. It's hard to think of this team as a really good team. This is the kind of team where, well, if we get hot, maybe we fluke into like a wild card, playoff deal, and who knows. Some of the starting pitching, top three guys are pretty decent. You might be able to pull Arizona Diamondbacks as long as the bats hold up, and question mark, who knows. And I feel like we're just sort of in this holding pattern like we were last week, and it'll probably take a couple weeks before we figure that out. I will note, and James, you might have some thoughts on this. I read somewhere at the All-Star break that the Cubs had one of the weakest second half schedules in baseball. Hasn't felt like it so far. Looking at the Diamondbacks and the Brewers and some of the other teams, the Cardinals and the Reds and Kansas City and whatnot. And I was looking forward of these last 48 games. I think the Cubs play like 12 games against the Twins, Cleveland, the Phillies, the Yankees, and I guess if you count the Dodgers, it's 15 games. So 15 of their last 48 are against what I would consider to be pretty good teams. And then they play, another 12 games or so against sort of like similarly situated games. And then they play like 20 or so games against some really bad teams still. So we have that looking, knock on wood, the famous last words, right? But the White Sox, Colorado, the Oakland A's, just teams that Marlins, teams that we don't always do well against, but you feel like you should.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess, we're not going to see it this week. We'll see it at the end of this week, but the Cubs need to take advantage of that. And I don't know. I think, James, you had some thoughts on the Cubs, this interesting stretch they have in Chicago here that actually might be a catalyst for some improvement.
Yeah, I really wish that the Cubs were a team that had like a little bit more of a just a better record by at least a few games right now, because you kind of look at the way they've played this season. They've been honestly a solid team at home for the most part. Like, I think that I'm trying to remember off the top of my head what their record is at Wrigley Field this season.
30,
I was going to say 30 and 26.
Yeah.
I mean, you get a few games better than that at home. You're in the thick of this thing. If you're right around the 500 mark right now, you're right in the thick of this thing. And I think to your point, Pat, about teams not being in a kind of a worse position the Cubs will be playing coming up, you have to remember kind of the way these things ebb and flow. The Diamondbacks have been, one of those teams that weren't great the first half of the season. They've really started to find themselves in the second half. The Cubs did lose 2 out of 3 to them earlier this month. The Cardinals have been kind of one of those teams that's been down for a while, then they got real red hot. And then honestly, this series, I was not all that impressed with what St. Louis was kind of able to
really bad, didn't
put
they?
together. They did not look good at all. I was like, this is the team really that the Cubs are still chasing in the standings. And then even the Phillies out of the All-Star break have been they've been playing some really poor baseball. I think at one point they were like 3-12 out of the break. They had one of the worst records in baseball coming out of the All-Star break. I mean, they beat
the Cubs twice after the All-Star break, right? Or was that right before the All-Star break?
Right before.
Yeah,
Yeah. That 4-day stretch clearly, completely ruined the Philadelphia Phillies. We need like another national crisis so Nick Castellanos can go off or something. Just do one of those things. But I think like the thing that just really stands out right now is that I wish they were a little bit better overall record-wise, because they have a stretch from the beginning of August until August 23rd. They leave Chicago for a grand total of 3 games during that stretch. They've got the 2 road games against the White Sox. They do have to go to Cleveland, who's one of the best teams in the American League, and they can find so many different ways to beat you. It is so crazy. But this is a really advantageous part of the schedule in that even if you have like tough games during this stretch, they're going to be played at Wrigley Field. And I do think the Cubs have played better at home. Like record 30-26 is not the best home record that we've ever seen, but certainly indicative, I think, of better play overall at the friendly confines. And so I wish they were a little bit better positioned to take advantage of this, but it basically just means you have no margin for error at all right now. You can't afford to, throw away 2 out of 3 to the Cincinnati Reds, for example. I think that you have to have a winning road trip coming up against the White Sox in Cleveland. I think that's not, outlandish to say they should go 3-2 in those games. But then when they come back, they've got a Toronto team that is not playing up to snuff whatsoever. And then they've got a home series against Detroit. I mean, they need to go like 4-2 in that stretch at least, or 5-1. Like they've got to get a sweep or 2 under their belts if they're really serious about contending. And call me skeptical. I think that they're just this team that's just going to continue to be like this mid-level, just like really annoying team. Frankly, boys, I have not really seen a Cubs team that is so destined to go 81-81. Like, that is just, I keep coming back to it over and over again. And I know that's going to require them to go a little bit above 500 the rest of the way. But God, does this feel like an 81-win team. It is so strange how just completely dead even down the middle this team feels like.
And it's not like some other prior teams. Like, for example, I think the 1977 team was red hot until June, and then they tanked. And we saw in 2004 and some other seasons where, whether they finished 81 or 81 or not, but teams that were kind of underachieving, it seemed like, but they went through these ebbs and flows. And this Cubs team, at least now for the last month, are just kind of, it's like a war of attrition. They win one, they lose one. They win two, they lose two. They win three, they lose three.
Yep.
Yeah, and it's extra frustrating when a team is trying to remain in the hunt, trying to be to pass up these things, and all these other teams in front of them. And you mentioned, James, you have no margin for error. You can't have an eighth inning like you had on Saturday's game, where like you had a chance to sweep the Cardinals, and you snatched defeat from the jaws of victory by unforced errors in the eighth inning, multiple.
Yep. Yeah.
Conversely,
I mean,
I was just saying, they snuck one out on Thursday night with that amazing comeback, which was, unheard of for the Cubs this year. But you kind of feel like you were due a couple of those, considering that do the Cubs still lead the league in blown saves, I think, too. So it's nice when somebody else blows a save against you.
Right.
I mean, it's only fair at some point that the reverse also be true. But having won that game in such sort of unlikely, spectacular fashion, Saturday's game really did hurt because, boy, pop up, right? I mean, you just, between Armstrong and Horner, and I get the communication issues and the sun and the high sky and stuff. I mean, I'm not necessarily, it didn't even worth trying to figure out, who's to blame, who should have done what, but just the point being that that's the difference between a sweep or winning 3 out of 4.
Well, it started with the Paredes error before that.
Yes. Yep.
So it was multiple errors, not just that.
And then he got another dumb one on Sunday, which should have been a hit, by the way. I thought that was kind of silly. So not the best defensive weekend Paredes has ever had.
No. Hopefully,
Best defensive week he's had with the Cubs, though.
That's
Oh, I love when you get all existential on us, Pat.
So we had Jed Hoyer also doing an interview on the Score that got a lot of traction this past week, where he I listened to it in its entirety, and I think for those of us who follow the team as closely as this group does, we didn't hear anything that was surprising to us, but people seem to be a little surprised hearing about how he's risk adverse at handing out large contracts.
Say it isn't so, Jeremy.
Yeah. So I don't know why this was so controversial this week, but basically, if you thought that maybe the Cubs could go after Juan Soto in the offseason, this didn't make you feel any better that they actually were going to do anything more than the usual, we were in talks, we tried, we got outbid. That's and that seems to be what's already being set up here. We'll start with you, James. Your thoughts on Jed Hoyer this week?
I'm of the same opinion you guys are, where this was nothing particularly surprising. And also I'm well aware of Jed Hoyer's kind of record as being a transparently opaque executive, yes. If that makes sense, where he'll state like the goal of a team is like, hey, we're like going to aim to build for 2025. This is not a sell-off. We're not exactly buyers. And then goes out and gets a guy like Paredes and does basically exactly what he said. It's just nobody took him at face value on that. And so I think he went kind of above what they expected. So I'm not saying he's like playing decoy and he's going to go really hard after Juan Soto, but I would also say two things to that. One, he's not going to reveal all of his cards now, and there's no reason for him to do so. I think that he is going to take everything on a case-by-case basis. And the only other thing I would bring up with that, if he wants to talk about being risk averse about giving out big contracts. Think of the biggest contracts this team has given out while Jed Hoyer has been in Chicago. It's been guys like Jason Hayward and Dansby Swanson. It's not like they're, covering themselves in glory with those two particular signings. I mean, yeah, the John Lester signing was, I think, a runaway success, but that was also 9 years ago at this point, almost 10 years ago at this point. So I think
I'll give
that
Theo that credit.
What I'm saying is that his experience in Chicago, whether in the head chair or not, has been at best very mixed on these big contracts, and at worst, probably on the wrong side of it. And so I'm not going to be super pissed off if he actually is risk averse. I'm just saying that, again, transparently opaque. That is the thing I'm going to continue to say about Jed Hoyer. He's going to tell you the goal, but boy, howdy, he is not going to tell you about the steps to get to said goal.
Because they're really steep.
And no fan wants to hear all about that mumbo jumbo, Pat.
Yeah.
Any thoughts from you, Pat?
On Jed? No,
Yeah.
I've said my piece.
Okay.
We'll have plenty of time in the offseason to look at the team and the lack of stars and really the lack of sort of opportunities to improve the offense based on having so many slots filled up right now and how they're going to have to get creative to figure out ways to do better or just run things back out the same. We'll see how they. Yeah. Some of it will depend on whether Bellinger opts out or not, but it's going to be. I think you can kind of expect next year's team to look a lot like this year's team, which looked a lot like last year's team, with hopefully a few more improvements in the bullpen and other places to kind of carry them over. But you know what? Maybe we'll be surprised. Maybe Corbin Burns will be in a Cubs uniform next year. Who knows?
Or maybe a guy like Blake Snell will be. He's probably going to end up opting out of his deal. He's been really lighting the world on fire lately. So we never quite know how the dominoes are going to fall with all of those like opt-outs and things like that. So I suppose we have to give Jed a little bit of credit because he wants to make sure that he has an opportunity to grab a chair when the music stops, but kind of still a weird handling of the trade deadline. I do echo you guys' sentiments on that for sure.
I don't think I'd give him credit. I would just say, I'll believe it when I see it. How about that?
I'm always of the middle ground with Jed. So when I say give him credit, I'm essentially saying I'm not going to excoriate him, but I'm also not going to throw roses at his feet. So we're going to have to find the middle ground between that. Maybe a light pat on the back and a little extra aggressive one at the end to just kind of let him know that we're still expecting better. I don't know. That's kind of
put an extra 20 in his front pocket there and maybe spend it.
Just give him a little slap on the face like an Italian mobster. Is that what you're saying?
Maybe the new Motorola patches will pay for some relief help.
You know what? You're making all these jokes now, but when they go out in the off season and they grab Shane Bieber, you're gonna love that blue M on the jerseys, man.
Yeah, what was your take on this patch?
Inevitable. I think that, that you saw the team photos at the beginning of the season. You saw the reverse of the patch where they had it on the non-leading arm. You're like, they're going to have a patch on the jersey at some point. And I'm honestly used to seeing the Motorola patch because the Padres have it on their jerseys. And I frankly watch a lot of Padre games because they get on national TV because they're good. And also they're a West Coast team. So when the Cubs are done, I flip them on. So this honestly did not, it doesn't look that jarring to me because I'm kind of used to the giant M on jerseys. And I'm also glad, for the record, that they chose the color scheme that they did because it's not quite as jarring as it would be if it was, say, like a white circle with a blue M. I'd be like, what on earth is that crap on the jersey? Instead, it's like, okay, it sort of looks like it belongs there in some weird idiocracy kind of way.
Yeah, compared to, I always thought of like the Arizona Diamondbacks when they have their big ADT logo there that doesn't fit any of the jersey themes, and I'm like, and they have like 1,000 jerseys, and I'm like, well, it doesn't go with any of them, and I was hoping that it was going to look better than that. That was kind of the floor for me, and
you say your sight's so high, Jeremy.
This was fine. This was just not. It wasn't offensive. It's fine.
Can I ask you, I'm sorry, can you give me a rundown of what it looked like on the Wrigleyville jerseys? Because I actually did not watch Friday's game. I listened to it on the radio.
Yes, I was listening as well. I did not see the patch on the Wrigleyville jerseys. I'm already not a fan of the Wrigleyville jerseys, so I'm probably the wrong person to ask.
I think other I'm pretty sure you and I have had this discussion before where I said that I feel like they should have either gone with scoreboard green or marquee red if they were going to do this jersey. And by the way, it is actually a white circle with a blue M in it on the Wrigleyville jerseys. I just looked it up.
My daughter actually asked me, we were watching the game on Friday. She's like, why did they change their uniforms? I said, oh, well, it's the Wrigleyville ones. We've seen them around. People wear these things, and they do it a couple times a year. She's like, yeah, but why today? I'm like, good question. I don't know why today.
They do it every Friday. Yeah.
Friday. Yeah. So I have two observations to make, and then I'll be done with the patches. First, I think that as a general rule, the age of the viewer is in direct proportion to the dislike of the patches. In other words, the older you are, the worse you think these things are. You're less likely to be a soccer fan, probably. You're probably more likely to be a traditionalist. And having never seen patches on uniforms for X number of years, this is not something that I think younger people are more go with the flow on this kind of stuff because they see this in other sports. And
we've seen it with the NBA. You see it with EPL. You see it like you see it in pro wrestling.
Kind of a late adapter of it, kind of when you think about it. A lot of teams have them on their jerseys. I'm just trying to think of any that I come off the top of my head that don't.
Baseball was focused on gambling, so they didn't have as much time. My second,
be careful, you might get fired like Jeff Merrick did.
My second observation is that I think a real missed opportunity from a marketing standpoint for these would have been a sponsorship from locally headquartered, Chicago headquartered Walgreens. They could have had a cursive W on the sleeve. Just saying.
They could have looked like the Washington Nationals.
I was going to say that's infringement by the.
I will also
it's
point
the W's. It's the it's the win, right? The W. Everybody has the W.
I will also point out Motorola is headquartered in Chicago. So
yes, they are, but they're an M. They're an upside down W. See, you want the W to signify winning.
Just knock Mike Tachman on his ass, and it's a W. I don't understand what the big deal is here.
Well, moving on to something more important. I had an observation today that I thought I would share with you on the actual people who play baseball. And I was looking at the batteries for the teams, and then it got me thinking. And so I did a little research. Amazing what you can find on the internet these days.
Yeah.
So in the last 30 years, the Cubs have developed and debuted 4 catchers who were the primary catchers for at least one season, meaning had the most plate appearances or whatever at offense. Can you name those 4? Starting with today, going backwards. Yeah.
Let's say go ahead, Jeremy. You do the first one. I can go with the second one.
So starting with Amaya and going backward.
Yeah.
Okay. Wilson Contreras.
Yep.
Giovanni Soto is one that comes to mind for me.
There's one more.
In the last 30 years, you said?
Yeah.
Well, I'm probably dating myself a little bit. I remember how Joe Girardi came into the organization. So
you just missed him. He was a little bit before then.
Okay.
In the 80s, I will tell you, the Cubs had Jody Davis.
Yes.
David Berryhill, Joe Girardi, and Rick Wilkins. They had 4 in the 80s alone. Since then, they've had 4. And I will also note that the all-time greatest WAR of any Cub catcher was Rick Wilkins, 6.6.
That's unbelievable to me.
1993, 30 home runs. Yeah.
I would have thought like Michael Barrett would have weaseled into that conversation somehow at some point.
Well, Michael Barrett, certainly not his highest WAR as a Cub was 2.4, but also not a homegrown product. So.
Well, I meant for WAR, not for
WAR.
Yeah.
So there's one more catcher developed by the Cubs. I use that term loosely. Debuted with the Cubs. How about that? Probably developed by the Cubs. Who knows?
Huh.
What can we get a year? A range?
A range?
Doug DeCenzo. I don't remember it. No.
Let's see. How do I want to do this? I don't want to give it away. How about this? I'll give you a nickname. Would that help?
Sure.
Beef.
Wellington Castillo. Yeah.
Yes.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
Gave the extra L to Wilson Contreras
I
so
have
charitably.
here
I
in
love
my
that
office,
guy.
Somewhere in my office here, I have a Wellington Castillo autographed baseball bat. So,
well, clearly it holds a really significant place to you if you can't find it.
No,
well,
I
it's
can't.
right
It's in the corner.
It's right next to his Luis Valbuena autographed jersey.
Yes, yeah, I was in.
I thought it was. Oh, I thought it was the Nate Shearholtz cleats. Damn it! I knew
in
it.
Successive seasons, I got the Wellington Castillo bat, followed by the Valbuena, followed by the John Lester autographed jersey, which I have framed, followed by Julius Peppers that my wife bought me, not realizing he was now a Packer.
Hall of Fame, baby.
But now Bears Hall of Fame.
But now Hall of Fame.
Yeah.
So anyway, I thought about that because, jury's still out on Amaya. I think a lot of people are thinking maybe he's not like a starting catcher, probably, offensively or defensively. But he's been hitting a little bit better, but that's not saying a lot. So he's one of the 4 in 30 years. That seems like a low number, doesn't it?
It would seem to be, but I have a feeling your research went deeper than this.
Well, no, it just shows that there are other teams, in particular in the NL Central, who have produced like a dozen said people. Cincinnati Reds, teams like that.
But see, I will counter that by saying in a course of 30 years, if you're developing 12 catchers, to me that indicates you can't find a solution.
Well, or it indicates that they're leaving you to go to other teams or they're being traded. Because you've got more coming behind them. No, it was just we talked about positions earlier. I mentioned sort of briefly how positions where the Cubs could improve for next year. And I think there's no position on the actual field where other non-pitcher position, right? Where the Cubs stand the greatest chance to improve their team if they wanted to than catcher, right? That seems to be a spot where if they could get, there should be a way to do that. And it doesn't seem like it's going to be internal. I think the Ballesteros thing, probably not a catcher long-term, but also, do you really want to go to next season with a second-year catcher and a rookie catcher? Probably not. You want somebody, be like if they could trade for a Sean Murphy, like if that were even humanly possible, but
right.
Like it was.
Well, you look at the free agent class that's going to be coming out. You basically have the highest paid catcher currently slotted to be a UFA without like options and stuff is Max Stassi from the White Sox, by the way, $5.83 million for next season. Tomas Neveau is catcher,
right?
Tomas Neveau is the 3rd youngest UFA catcher next season. Tomas Neveau. Chew on that one. The class is not great. If you don't get Danny Jansen, you're probably going to have to, like you said, go the route of the trade. Boy, it would have been smart of them to go get Sean Murphy for the nothing that the Braves gave up to get him.
But I think they do need to make that upgrade because that's a position where, and I'm not saying kick Amaya to the curb, but so you need someone else with him. I think he'd be a much better backup catcher or split time catcher than he would be.
Absolutely.
Because he would be playing less, which would make him better in the sense of the overall benefit to the team. But anyway,
it is. I was just going to say, it kind of reminds me of the fact that the Cubs went out and got Paredes, and it's like, well, I think third base would have been right up there with catcher before they went out and did that. And so it kind of resets your priorities a little bit. And I definitely would agree with you that I think catcher, boy, if that's not the top need, I'm struggling to think of what the top need would be outside of perhaps bullpen help. I think catcher is an easy spot to
maybe there's a team that needs a second baseman.
The Cubs have
willing to trade a catcher.
A glut of them in the minor leagues right now. So if you want to explore a Horner trade, you look at the guys they have coming up. There are a lot of them who could potentially move over to second base, especially now they've got Paredes in the fold.
Yeah. Matt Shaw and others, right? So anyway, just
congratulations, by the way, on the call up to him today. Got called up to AAA.
Oh, you're welcome. Yeah.
Matt Shaw, Kevin Alcantara, and James Triantos all called up to the Iowa Cubs today. So we're big Matt Shaw fans on this podcast. So definitely happy to see that move for him.
If you'll bear with me here, I have one more observation. Non-catcher related. One of the, I won't call it a pet peeve, but one of the concerns I've had over the last couple of years is that despite having, a highly ranked farm system, it feels as if the Cubs haven't really seen a lot of the players from that farm system actually land at Wrigley Field and be successful. And there's almost been a reticence. I think there was talk that David Ross was reticent to this, and perhaps even this year, when you're in this kind of weird gray zone of trying to win, but also wanting to have young players, but not wanting to cost yourself any wins because they're young, you kind of get yourself boxed in a little bit. And one of the things that we've seen, certainly in the last couple of months, is Piquer Armstrong, who was the highest rated Cubs prospect, who has definitely struggled offensively this year. There's no question about that. And at times, I think I've even noted, has looked really overmatched at home plate. But the last couple of weeks, it seems like he's getting some better at bats, and he seems like he's doing a little better offensively, such that you again, it's this situation where these young guys basically need to play, right? In order, he's got 225 plate appearances or something, right? But they need to play to get better. He's also flawless on the base paths, right? Was he like 21 for 21 or something?
He's certainly up there if he's not perfect on the season.
Trey Turner was 30 for 30 last year, but I'm not familiar with too many. I think that might be the record, maybe. But anyway, he's got a lot going for him defensively and with speed, so that helps. But sometimes you have to bite the bullet and take a couple months and play some guys. And I know that they're hesitant to do that now because they can't get themselves out of the playoff hunt or into it. Right. So they're really, and we've talked about, some of the guys who might be ready to come up for a month, come up in September or August and September and but not like a Canario situation where you bring a guy up and you let him bat 6 times over 3 weeks. Like you need to give people a chance to show what they have. And that's been a real challenge for the Cubs for the reasons we just outlined. But gosh, I just don't like the idea of going into yet another season not knowing if any of these guys are any good, without seeing them, at the major league level and seeing what you have to work with. Unless you just want to trade them before anybody else finds out because you don't think they are good enough. I don't know, but you know what I mean? Like that
is not their style. That is not.
So it feels like we're just going to go into another year, without doing that. And maybe if the Cubs do fall out of it in the next several weeks, and or if they are 8 games back in the last wild card spot at the beginning of September, and they're 6th and in the race for the last wild card, so maybe then they would pull up stakes, and maybe Suzuki or Bellinger, somebody will be hurt, or whatever. I don't know.
I mean, I would imagine Bellinger's finger is still not 100%.
Yeah.
Like they were talking about that on the broadcast tonight when they weren't talking about the stuffed animal behind home plate. They were talking about that he had the pad in his bat. Can I just say, like, I don't mean to rant about this because I do have a very important follow-up question to what Pat was saying, but that was some of the stupidest TV I've ever watched in my life, and I've watched a lot of ESPN broadcasts. Like that is, you literally are broadcasting a 4-run game. Shut the hell up about the dog and focus on baseball. Stop texting Marlins, man. What are we even doing here? That's the stupidest crap. Like you're not growing the game that way. You're pissing everybody off. And you know what? ESPN doesn't give a crap, but Jesus, that was stupid.
ESPN.
Your television doesn't have a mute function? Mine does. I didn't hear any of that.
Listen, no. I had a cat on my lap and the remote was 8 feet away. I don't know what to tell you, man. I was a captive audience for that shit show. Sorry. Anyway, I don't know if you have bleeps on this show, but I got a little heated there.
We will need them now.
Accurate. I allow it.
my follow up to your point, Pat, is that there are a few guys that I think could ostensibly be called up and I think make an impact on this team if they were to get regular playing time. And I think it's logical to think that they could get some look. The problem is, are they going to do it because of how young the guys are? And I'm specifically talking about Owen Casey and Moises Ballesteros, who are 2 of the youngest guys in AAA right now. And I think Owen Casey, especially if Ian Happ ends up going on the shelf with the shoulder issue that he ran into the wall and suffered, that's a guy I would immediately be like, I'm putting him in the lineup. I'm getting that power in here and I'm seeing what I've got. Or, as you pointed out, catcher, the black hole of existence for the Cubs. Why not bring Ballesteros up? That dude's mashing everywhere he goes. Yeah. So give him a look for a few weeks. It's a weird situation they find themselves in just because of how young those guys are. And I know if you're hitting well in the minors, you deserve a shot ultimately to come up. But 21 is still a really young age to call up a guy to the big leagues for the first time.
So what I don't want, I agree with you. What I don't want is for Ian Happ to go on the IL, Bellinger to shift over, play outfield there, and then have Patrick Wisdom DH for 2 weeks instead.
Okay, that would annoy me. Yes.
What I want is, I want to move on really and see what we have with these guys. And if the Cubs are going to make a run this year, they probably need to get a spark anyway, right? So I look at it as sort of a worthwhile gamble. But you're right, that's exactly what they need to do. And a lot of teams that are bad have the advantage of being able to play a bunch of young players and develop them, a little bit at the major league level because they have nothing at stake. The Cubs are in a really odd situation now because they're just not bad enough, right? And we saw in 2013 and 14, the Cubs were bad enough they could let Javi Baez go out there and swing the bat and see what he could hit, and Rizzo scuffled that one year, and so what, but I think they just don't feel like they can right now, and that's the frustrating part. Is from a hitter perspective, there's this reluctance, and then when it comes to the pitching, where I think they are more likely to want to bring anybody up who's young and see what they can do. And it's an easier situation to do it in, right? In the bullpen. All their young players are hurt pretty much, and so that's a spot where right now, like, what I wouldn't give to have, like, the Wicks and the Browns of the world. I have Brown close some games, bring Horton up in September and let him start, a couple games. All these guys, and it's just one after another have gone on the injured list, and so they're sort of they're in the worst possible situation, that the pitchers are hurt and the hitters they're afraid to bring up.
I think, and Caleb Killian, by the way, I think is going to be a guy I think you will see come up this season now that he's been activated. I think they're going to want to start getting him some major league at bats and kind of see what he can do against big league hitting. So that would be the one guy I definitely could see. And thank God he's finally back, because he did look really solid in spring training.
Yeah, he's a guy we definitely have a lot more
waiting
questions
on for a while.
And answers on. Yeah, for sure. Definitely want to see if he's fixed. Like, he was broken for a while there, so hopefully he's turned it around. And as we look towards the week that will be for the Cubs and the teams that are ahead of them right now as they're competing for that final wild card spot you mentioned at the top, Pat, 6 games behind the San Francisco Giants, who are ahead of the Cubs, had the best week, 7-3 in their last 10 games. While the Cubs are 6-4, everyone else 5-5, except for those Cardinals that are 4-6.
And of course, the Padres and Diamondbacks who are 8-2, but they're already
the ones who have already locked that in.
Yeah.
The Braves are locked in. Your Padres and Diamondbacks both, 8-2 weeks. They're both well above 500. So everyone else, only the New York Mets and the New York Mets are more than a game over 500 at this point. So
because the Cubs played a night game and all these other teams played in the day, I was watching the scoreboard to see who I could root for. The problem is, and this is something I find on almost a daily basis with the National League teams, is that when the Cubs win, they pick up half a game on half the teams and no games on the other half. And when they lose half a game on half the teams and no change to the other half, because everybody's playing everybody, right? Like, the Pirates are playing the Diamondbacks and the Reds are playing the Giants, right? It's just like a circular firing squad right now.
It's the problem with having that many teams ahead of you in the standings. If you're not competing against 1 or 2, it's 5 or 6. That's really hard for you to get hot and hope that nobody else does. Everyone else stays even and you get hot. That's what you got to hope for. But if there's ever a stretch of the schedule where this Cubs team could get hot, James mentioned it. They're going to be in Chicago for all but 3 games until the 23rd of August. So looking ahead, it's a tough matchup against the Twins at home and at Cleveland. Those are 2 teams that are tough matchups because you don't know if you think that they're good, but then they also play in the AL Central, and so the records are a little strange. because of who they play. So it's tough to gauge. I think it'll be a good. There's an opportunity there to not to not drop a series at home against the Twins before playing at the White Sox for 2 games. Those games always more difficult than they should be.
Yeah.
We saw that at home earlier this season against those White Sox. But the White Sox are historically bad, currently at 20 straight losses as of the time of this recording. James, would you rather see the losing streak for the White Sox still be intact when they play the Chicago Cubs? Or would you rather they break that streak, win a game, and then go on another losing streak before they start playing the Cubs?
Honestly, Jeremy, doesn't matter. I don't really care if the White Sox sweep their next series. I still think they're going to be well within the range of if the Cubs don't sweep them, I think it's a disappointment. If you split those games at the rate, even though you're facing Garrett Crochet on Friday night, I think that that's still something that the Cubs need to go into that thinking if we don't win both of these games, that is a disappointment. So I'm not going to get into, this defeatist attitude, this corner you want to paint me in, man. I'm just going to say, I don't care if they lose their next 3. I want the White Sox to just get pummeled by the Cubs for 2 games because that's what the Cubs should do to a laughing stock organization like that. So I'm going to say, doesn't matter to me. Do whatever you guys want to do. White Sox, I will say, I did not anticipate that they would end up threatening the 88 Orioles who lost 21 games in a row. So really bang up job, and love the fact that Chris Getz had a big heart-to-heart meeting with Pedro Grifol after they had lost their 17th game in a row and decided, that guy needs to continue captaining this troop. It just is breathtaking stupidity from the White Sox.
In fairness to the White Sox, and I'm always fair to the White Sox.
Always. Yeah, that's
if you were to subtract out from their record this year the 20-game losing streak, the earlier 14-game losing streak, and the 3-22 start, they would still be under 500.
They'd still, I think it's if you got rid of their 2 longest winning streaks of the season, they'd still have the worst winning percentage in baseball. I think that's what I saw.
Yeah.
Not good.
Yeah.
Not good.
Yeah.
Oh, and by the way, Eloy Jimenez was 4 for his first 6 after they traded him. So, yeah.
Bubble wrap him for next week or for next game. Yeah.
Yeah. I don't even want to talk about how stupid that whole thing was where you actually got somebody to take Eloy Jimenez off of them. It is a miracle. I don't understand why people are lining up to do favors for the Chicago White Sox.
Well, the White Sox paid most of his salary, I think, right?
Well, I was going to say originally it didn't look that way, but I do think they kicked in like $4 million or something like that. I guess there goes one of Jerry's skyboxes at the new South Loop Stadium.
He had to tell Garrett Crochet he didn't have enough money to give an extension.
What did you guys make of that, by the way, that like him blowing up the trade talk or allegedly blowing up the trade talks, and then a report coming out the next day that's like, yeah, teams didn't really give a crap about that. Like, I love that. Like, Chris Getz was like, oh, he blew this trades up and it was so bad. I didn't like the way he did it. Then the report comes out the next day. Yeah, executives didn't give a crap. They really could have cared less. Like, that's hilarious to me that somebody threw Chris Getz under the bus like that.
Yeah. So much of what you hear during trade talk season is garbage anyway. Who knows? Like, to be a fly on the wall to see what people were offering Jed for various players or vice versa would be very informative, but we'll never know, or at least we won't know, for a long time. So same thing with those guys.
Well, let's lock in our predictions for the 5 games upcoming here. We've got a 5-game stretch here. An off day, a rare off day on Sunday. No baseball. Sunday, August 11th. So 5 games. We'll start with you, Pat. 3 at home against Minnesota, 2 at the White Sox. What do you got?
Minnesota's playing well. White Sox are playing poorly. Probably flip. I'm going to say 3-2.
3-2.
Is
James,
that underwhelming to you or no?
Only one against Minnesota, or do you
I
think
was
they're
gonna
splitting
say,
those White Sox?
Yeah,
I think 2 out of 3 for Minnesota and split with the White Sox.
Split with the White Sox.
I know, but it would still be 3 out of 4 for the White Sox on the season, which would be a .250 winning percentage for the White Sox, which is commensurate with their season-long perforance. So,
and thank God we would win the BP Crosstown Chalice
again.
Or whatever the hell it is. yeah,
that's right.
I'm gonna go 4-1 because I think that the Cubs, I want to say, still have the best record of any National League team against the American League this season.
That is correct.
For whatever reason,
here go no tiebreakers against National League wild card.
You know what? All the wins are good right now, man. That's all I'm going to say about that. I think that the Cubs, they have Shota going in this series. They've also got Kyle Hendricks going in this series. I think that they've got the starting pitching to potentially take 2 out of 3 from the Twins. And like I said, I don't care that Garrett Crochet is pitching. The White Sox are a dumpster fire. I'm going 4-1. I think they'll win 2 out of 3 against Minnesota. Tightly played series. And then just unload on the White Sox, please. Just embarrass them in front of their fans. That would be so nice to not have to sweat a few games or rely on late inning heroics. Like, just take care of business early and put them out of their misery and make Pedro Grifol go make some more excuses.
I think James sold me on 4-1 this week. I think I was more in line with you, Pat. I was ready for a split against the White Sox, but talking it through here, I think James has convinced me and reminded me just how bad
Charlie
they actually
Brown. Are. Here I'm Lucy with football.
You know what? Honestly, it would be hilarious to me if they swept the Twins and then got swept by the White Sox, because that would be the perfect encapsulation of the Cubs season.
That is the 2024 Chicago Cubs in a nutshell. 100% agree. That's most likely. We'll sit here on Monday and say, yeah, that thing we joked about, yeah, that actually happened.
If that does come to pass, I would like to make a 30-second appearance on the next podcast to promise that I will never make a prediction again.
we will have you phone in from Cleveland.
a little PSA while I'm drunk in the bleachers in Cleveland. Hey, so you guys, I just wanted to say I'm not making any more predictions there. No more.
Are you a Simpsons character?
You know what? Very well could be. It was the style at the time. I wore an onion on my belt.
Well, with that, I think that's enough talk about the current Chicago Cubs team. Pat, can you take us to 40 years ago, where every single week we parachute in on the 1984 Chicago Cubs, see what they're up to this week 40 years ago, as we continue to celebrate that team all season long. Pat, what's going on this week in 1984?
What a great week. The Cubs started off the week a half a game behind the Mets in second place, and they ended up the week a half a game ahead of the Mets in sole possession of first place, something that they would not relinquish for the rest of the year.
Huge.
So big week. They were 5-2 that week, beating the Phillies 2 out of 3. You know, the Phillies, half our team were Phillies at the time, or recent Phillies,
right?
And then beating Montreal 3 out of 4. Sorry, Andre Dawson, but the Cubs beat them. But there were a couple memorable things that happened that week. Most memorable would be the August 2nd game, where the Cubs beat the Expos 3-2. I watched this game live on television, and I remember quite well watching this happen. So here, let me give you the setup. So Sutcliffe starts the game. He goes 8 1/3, gives up 8 hits, 2 runs, 10 strikeouts, pitches a dominant game. Runs out of gas. So they bring Lee Smith in, the closer. And they're men at first and third. There's 1 out. The batter is Pete Rose. Cubs are up by 1. So a fly ball or a weak grounder that doesn't result in a double play is probably going to give up a run. So Rose lines a ball hard up the middle. It hits Lee Smith in the shoulder, caroms into the air, and is caught on the fly by Dave Owens, who was the hero of the Sandberg game, because he actually drove in the winning run in that game, not Ryan Sandberg. Owens then takes it and throws to first to double off Don Stanhouse, who's a pitcher who is pinch running for some reason. I don't know why, don't remember. And the Cubs win on that double play, which Harry Carey, in all of his glory and late in the game after many a cocktail, began referring to as the immaculate deflection game. So the Cubs won the game. It would have been a base hit up the middle easily had it not hit Smith in the shoulder. Had it done what every other ball does when it hits a pitcher in the shoulder and gone to the ground, tying run scores. But instead, it carried into the air all the way to shortstop and led to a somewhat rare 1-6-3 double play. And the Cubs won the game 3-2 to start off the week. Later that week, on August 5th, the Cubs would win a game. Keith Moreland remember when the Cubs had traded Buckner and they traded Mel Hall and Joe Carter. They were opening up space in the outfield. Durham had moved to first base. You had Matthews in left, Dernier in center. Well, Keith Moreland, Zonk, as they called him, who I think was a running back at like Texas or Texas A&M, I think, in undergrad. He was playing right field for the Cubs. He hits a grand slam. Cubs win the game 4-3. All the runs scored off the grand slam. So a timely hit. But the Cubs were flying high. They were at home. They'd won 5 out of 7. They had a huge series coming up against the Mets. Remember last week we talked about how they had gone to New York and taken 3 out of 4 from the Mets to kind of climb back into it. So now they were about to face the Mets next week, and with a perilous but still half game lead. It's probably the latest the Cubs had been in first place since, if not 1969, then the very early 1970s. I can tell you that. So all was well in Wrigleyville, and for all the talk now, 40 years later, about the Sandberg game was the pivotal moment, blah blah blah. The immaculate deflection game, I can't tell you enough about how that was one of those vibes games, right? Where you're like, maybe, just maybe, the gods are on our side for a change, because that's not something that happens to the Cubs. No way. Pete Rose, the all-time hits leader, is gonna get robbed, and not just robbed, but it's gonna turn into a game-ending double play. That doesn't happen to the Cubs. So anyway, so that was the week in review.
Excellent. Always great to check in on the 84 Cubs. And with that, we're going to wrap it up for the week. We're going to call it a podcast. James, please remind our listeners how they can support all your work on the internet.
Currently covering the Olympics for NBC. Go through next Sunday. Would appreciate the support we put in as a station. A ton of work into covering the games as extensively as we can. We have a lot of local athletes competing. Really appreciate all the support we've gotten. So definitely check us out there. We are also currently previewing the upcoming Big Ten football season on Big Ten Country. We had our big Pac-12 greetings episode last week with potential champion Oregon. This week we've got Nebraska. We came out with today, and then Wednesday we will be talking about an Iowa team that could win 10 or 11 games, which is kind of insane when you think about how bad that team was last year. So please be sure to check out.
Player, right? Their punter.
They lost. I was going to say they actually replaced him with another Australian punter. And I actually asked John Steppe about that today. So you will get to know all about their new punter if you listen to the latest episode of Big Ten Country when it comes out on Wednesday. But yeah, we very proud of our Olympic coverage, and Ken Davis and I are having an absolute blast covering Big Ten football for Big Ten Country. So be sure to check both those out.
Awesome stuff. And I mentioned the YouTube at the top of the channel, at the top of the show. Please support the channel there, and make sure you're telling your Cub fan friends to support us on the audio feeds as well. Subscribe to the podcast on any podcatcher of choice, and follow us on all the social media platforms at Wrigleyville Nat. And with that, now we're officially wrapping it up, calling it a podcast. Pat, thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Jeremy.
Thanks again, everyone, for listening, and we'll talk to you again next time.